And hi everyone, welcome to Life Edge, because life just doesn't have to be mediocre. And I'm joined today by my good friend and co-host, Dr. Susan Nash. Hey Susan, how are you?
Great. Well, a little hoarse, but better, and glad to be here.
It's better than being a big horse, right? So it's no complaints.
Anyway,
I'm
a pony.
A pony. We've got a great guest today. She will be on in a second. Here we go. And joining us in that center position of power is Dr. Julie Orlov. How are you, Julie?
I'm great. How are you doing today?
We are doing well. Julie is, now correct me if I'm wrong, you're a licensed family and marriage therapist. You're an author. You're an author of a book called The Pathway to Love, and a million articles that you've written about it. You've worked in training and e-learning and all sorts of stuff. And now you're living out in the beautiful mountains of San Jacinto, California, which is really lovely out there. It's so good to see you again. And we haven't seen each other in probably about 7 years, which is a long time. We've had friends in common. And you were also the president of ASTD out here, weren't you, in Los Angeles?
Yes, I did that for a year. That was a great experience. It's a great organization. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's fun. And so what have you been up to recently?
You know, lately I've been focusing on a couple things. So I'm working in my private psychotherapy practice and helping people just create lives that are more meaningful and satisfying. And then I actually do the same work in the workplace. So I've been doing a lot of work with managers and directors and helping them create relationships with their direct reports and colleagues that also work. I'm a firm believer in relationships, and my motto always is that when you have relationships that work, then every area of your life works better. It's at the foundation of, I believe, everything we do.
Yeah.
What kind of relationships? What kind of relationships do you think are the most important?
Yeah, I mean, it's all context. I mean, you know, obviously I think our family and friends are those relationships that can sustain us throughout a lifetime, although our personal relationships, some of them come and go. And our work relationships are extremely important to the work that we're doing and the goals we're trying to accomplish and impact we're trying to have on the world. And some of our work relationships are sustainable if past, you know, that position, if we tend to leave that position. And other relationships come and go. They're situational specific. And so we can be very close while we're, let's say, on a board for ASTD. And then when we leave the board, some of those relationships will last and some of them won't. Yeah.
I'm really surprised to hear that there's so much emphasis on a relationship in our culture, because we're not a high context culture. We're so low context. So could you talk a little bit about the differences in relationships in high context and low context cultures?
Well, I think that I think we're already starting to see some problems. I think we're going to continue to see some problems with the digital era and how much we are relating and communicating in a digital manner. So I think that's going to be a huge problem. Some people may have social phobias or they may be great introverts, but they were forced to go out into the world and make real connections with people. And now people, they connect a lot by text or by social media, but I'm not too sure how authentic and meaningful those relationships are if they're not within the context of having a real relationship outside of them. So yes, I think it's a very interesting time.
Yeah, especially in our low context culture, which is highly individualistic. I mean, so many people use Facebook and social media to create their ideal self, which I think makes it even more frightening to go out there in the real world and have people be disappointed.
Yes, I feel like I talked to my daughter. I have a 23-year-old daughter, And she says the difference between your generation and my generation using social media is your generation may still use it to show pictures of their grandchildren, share things that are really going on about their lives. And she said her generation, which is quite scary, is just all about creating an online persona. It's like they create their own public relations campaign. It's how do you compete with that? It's just crazy.
That's funny.
Yes.
Actually, when you said that, we should call it fake book, because you don't know who's real or not on Facebook. It's sort of interesting. One thing I've been reading about lately, and it just happened to hit me last night, where a friend of mine, I can't say a friend, somebody I knew, just barely knew. I knew as an acquaintance, but I've watched him for about 5 or 6 years on podcasts. He's a podcaster, and he committed suicide out of nowhere. And one of the people I do know said he and the other guy have been talking for 18 years as friends. Once a day or twice a day, they've been talking. No inkling of what was about to happen. And I started looking up what happened to him. I couldn't find anything. And I started reading how many people in the media are just wiping themselves out. And I'm going, why is that? What's going on? And I've had friends who've committed suicide, and not an inkling, not a word. Usually you can kind of maybe see a signal, a sign, nothing. It's just like, boom. Now, there is one thing I have noticed. People are going on some really bizarre diets, which mess with hormones, which mess with neurotransmitters, which mess with the way we think. And that's probably part of the reason they're going off. It probably isn't helping them any. But have you seen that in your practice or in just your day-to-day affairs, that there is more of a tendency to just check out? It's just...
Yeah, I think the level of mental illness is increasing. I do not see it decreasing. I actually see the level of pathology increasing. And part of that is, it may be diet, it may be social isolation, and it may be, some of the psychotropic medication. It's interesting, Susan, like circling back to what you said about low context, high context. Like, I moved to this little town of Idlewild. This is a perfect example. And I moved from Los Angeles, from the greater area of Los Angeles. Here, people look after their neighbors. There's a very strong sense of community. People will make sure that, if there's an emergency up here, they're checking in with everybody, which is a little bit different than the greater Los Angeles. It's not to say that little pockets, communities, we have a lot of little communities there. I'm not so sure, though, if people would know everybody within a 3-mile radius or not. But we do need to get more connected with each other, if nothing else, so that we can really make sure that we're all okay and we know that support is there. And to your point, Rick, I think it's also really important that we create a safe space so that if someone is struggling, or if I'm struggling, that I feel safe enough to share that struggle with somebody. And that's part of the problem. People suffer alone quite a bit. I totally agree. It's a big problem.
And it's almost like they go into a semi-psychotic state, because usually, from what I've read and seen, for somebody to either pull a trigger or take drugs or whatever to take themselves out, you're pretty much in a not normal state. You're probably in a semi-psychotic state, because our bodies and our brains tend to protect us from that kind of thing. And it takes a lot to get somebody into that state, or not. It can go like that. And it's just something sort of interesting. I lived in...
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I lived in Argentina for 3 years, from 1977 to 1980. Returning to LA, coming back here was a cultural shock, even though I've grown up in LA and New York. Here it was like, it's a much colder place than it was down there. And it took me literally about 1.5 years to get used to it again. It was just I was shocked. I go, wait a minute, this is where I'm from. And I went there, and I changed. The culture kind of envelops you in a much different way. It's much more family oriented. People are much close. I know Susan and I have had this talk about that, and she said it can be stifling sometimes to be in that, and it can be sometimes. And yet, when you come back to this situation, all of a sudden the stifling goes away, and now you're going, "Whoa, I'm alone." It's a very different feeling So, I got through it, obviously, but it's just something that when you do stuff like that, or when you move from LA to Idlewild, from a very busy, you're near the beach, everything was kind of hectic, and now you're in a very different place. And how are you adapting to that?
I've been really pleasantly surprised. It was a very welcoming community up here. So it's been a pretty easy transition. I started a private practice up here. I still have a practice in Hermosa that I go to once a week, but there's a need everywhere you go for help. I will say that, but my personal transition into this community has been lovely. People are very welcoming, and they're happy to have you. So
that's great.
That's been very nice. Yeah.
Have you ever thought about? Do you work at all with like little therapy dogs? I think they're fantastic.
It is so funny that you said that. So I have a dog. His name is Shlomo. Okay, he's a big, fluffy black dog, and he's my assistant. So I will bring him into the office once a week, and particularly for my clients that have extremely high levels of anxiety. I can't tell you, I almost feel like, he should get the paycheck, not me, because I think he's more helpful in some respects. So yes, I totally believe in therapy dogs. And there's also a big horse community out in this area. And I've also started working with horses in terms of equine assisted therapy. And that's another fascinating.
The tiny ones, the little tiny horses and the miniature donkeys. I think they're great.
It's some, but also those really big ones. So
really?
It's really interesting how horses can read people, and how they respond to people in these miraculous ways, and then to see how people respond when they get in this small round ring with one horse that has nothing on it, and it's their job to connect to that horse and see how they build that relationship. So connections come in all kinds of ways, and they can be 2-footed or 4-footed, and I think we benefit from all of them. Yes.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I'm a big believer in the idea of therapy animals, and I personally think that if somebody did have suicidal ideation or something, it could be a good time to like intervene with a constant companion and animal, and set up that relationship where somebody's relying on you without putting the animal at risk, of course.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think that a lot of the suicide, a lot of it's connected, I think, to people who've been struggling with depression, deep levels of depression for a long time. And I think people who haven't experienced what a real clinical depression feels like, they don't understand how isolating and withdrawing that can be. And it's, to have that go on for years and years is very hard for people to sustain levels of hope and reach out. But anytime people, especially people who are going through a grief process, to have somebody that is dependent on them, that they need to get up and take care of, it forces them out of the house to go walk a dog. All those things are super important and very helpful to people. Absolutely.
Julie,
love them.
Julie, you were talking about how people kind of get isolated. I remember, this is about 10 years ago, we had, actually a little longer, maybe 12 years ago, we had our daughter and 3 of her, we call them semi-cousins because they're not related, but they're all like cousins. And so there's about 5 of them all in the living room in our house with electronic devices playing. And I'm looking at them, I'm hearing biti tapa, da, 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 da. Nobody's talking. So I got up and I said, okay, hand them in. They're like, what? Give me the devices. But Uncle Rick, I don't care. Give me the devices now. No more talking now. So they give me all the devices, and I go, now? And one of them says, what are we supposed to do now? I go, talk to each other. And they literally sat there for about half hour. And then one of them said, hey, you guys want to go play basketball? Okay. and it was boys and girls. And they got up and they left to go play basketball. There was a court down the block from us. And then they came back and started talking to each other for about an hour and a half. And they looked at me, and they forgot about their devices. And I was going, you realize that talking, you're getting to know each other. You know nothing about each other other than what sound of game they were playing. And they were kind of sheepishly going, uh-huh. And they didn't ask for their devices back. They almost forgot about them. And I was thinking, how many kids are just so isolated, and even today, into these games, to the point that they don't know who's what, what's what, and they're on another planet sometimes.
Yeah. I think that was great of you. A great experiment and experience for them. Yeah, it's the same. It's, we have to, the pace we're at, the expectation of our level of responsiveness, the amount that we are dependent, reliant, and addicted to our devices is astronomical. And I think getting people to step away from those and have to figure out how to go back to just fun in a creative manner that's not already laid out for you is super important, and to have conversations. Yes.
Are you finding the kids aren't talking as much, or to me the friendships seem very shallowish? Just observing people, like when you go out to eat and you watch kids talking, it's really kind of dumb talk. It's not. I remember at that age we didn't talk that way. What's going on? I'm talking teenagers, and it's like, gee, it's like.
So Rick, how did you talk when you were a teenager?
How did I talk?
And how exactly do they talk? So I'm curious. I'm not really.
I think when I was growing up, the friends I had, we talked a little differently. We talked about girls, we talked about this, that, but we also talked. We talked about what's going on in life, society, whatever. There was a whole group of us, and we were all either athletes or doing other things. So we were involved in different things, but there was conversation. If I go to, let's say, a restaurant and I'm listening to 4 or 5 kids talking, one, they're very loud, but they're saying nothing. So there's a lot of noise, but the conversation isn't going. It's like, hi. A lot of laughing, a lot of goofing. The guys and girls, and you just listen and go, wow. They just had a whole conversation for a half hour or more about nothing. In fact, there may not have been a cohesive conversation, just noises. A couple of words here and there, not really tied to a sentence or paragraph. No concept of what's going on around them. You don't hear talking about anything that's beyond the social group, maybe. I find that odd, and it's sort of scary, actually. It's actually almost terrifying. It's like, this is it? Is this where we're going to go? Now, I've been to many other states, and I know all of you have too. It hasn't been much different. Maybe a little different, but not that much. So it's just something I'm noticing going, what's happening to our communication skills, to talking about things that matter, about, things that do matter to us in life. It doesn't matter if you're political or not, but politics do affect us, or what we're doing, or the wars in the world. It's like nobody talks about anything. It's like, no wonder we're getting away with murder. It's like nobody's incensed about anything that shouldn't be going on. Or maybe some are, but they're not getting any airtime. I don't know. Susan, what would you think?
Okay, so let's see. The closest thing I have a nephew who's a teenager, and he seems to talk a lot. I actually find myself tuning him out. So.
Well, what about the students in the college?
Yeah, they have things to think about, talk about. I mean, it depends on what you ask them and what they're supposed to relate to. But a lot of them, for example, in terms of, say, difficult times, a lot of them are very futuristic and are willing to talk about what they see as a future world with lots of AI and robots, and they talked about like the social credit system they have in China, and the idea that that people talk about that, and then they talk about ways to game the system.
Yeah. In fact, I remember. Do you guys remember what was the name of that company? Not Cred. I think it might have been Cred. There was a Cred one that measured your social credit, your social worth, and they're out of business. So much for that.
I don't know. I have 2 daughters, and my impression of them is that they do have all those conversations, and they do have relationships that are meaningful and deep. We have to remember that, our iPhones are also a tool, just like the telephone was when we were kids. So I think they use it for efficiency. In other words, making arrangements or finding out, when they're available, when they're going to meet, where they're going to meet. But I do think once they do get together with their friends, they are able to have those kind of conversations. My guess is that the kids that, let's say, 50 years ago would have had more of those superficial conversations then are the same kinds of kids that are having them now.
Probably true.
I'm not sure that the tool is creating it. I just think that they have a different type of tool available to them.
That's probably true.
Yeah.
Because everybody complains about millennials. I don't know. I know boomers that act just like millennials, and I know millennials that act like boomers, and I know millennials that act like just normal kids. There's this, people love to bash on the millennials like they're something special. They're not. I mean, every generation has its group of quote-unquote millennials, including the millennials, because they're not all the same. There's a whole mess of differences between them. But it is interesting how we like to, we got to beat up on somebody. Hey, millennials, they're good. Let's go beat up on them. And you have all these conferences saying, oh, these millennials and I don't know. When I was growing up, the boomers, I'm a boomer, so I was going, I didn't see any difference. I see the same work habits, work ethics, and everything else back then as we do now. It's just that you always have the good ones, and you have the not so good ones, and some that are just bums, and that's just the way it is. So, it's sort of interesting.
Here's a thought. Okay, so we live in an individualistic culture rather than collectivist, and our sense of identity is supposed to be self-actualized and self-actualizing. We're supposed to, and so we're kind of programmed to be perfect, perfectly receptive to creating a false self or an avatar self in Facebook or whatever, and branding ourselves. I love what you're saying, like creating our own brand and marketing. But then we're not allowed to be flawed. We're not allowed to be imperfect. And if we are allowed to be flawed, or if they are, it's artistically done and rendered. It's like, emo or something. What do you think?
Yeah, I can't agree with you more. One of the things I communicate as much as possible is that you're not alone. Like there's no such thing as a perfect relationship. None of us come from a perfect family. We all mess up. We all have our strengths, our weaknesses, and of course that depends on context anyways. That's what I think. I think we need to go towards a society that has a different expectation out there, and where it's okay to be beautifully flawed, because we all are. And for us to have a little bit more understanding and compassion, that for the most part, like, we're all just doing the best we can out there. And so, that's kind of, I think, the challenge out there. And that's what I mean by creating a safe space to say, this is who I am. This is what I'm struggling with this week.
Yeah.
I messed up the other day, or I'm scared. I'm scared that I'm not going to get into the school I want to get into, get the grade, have a marriage, whatever it is, that we can all just speak our truth and feel supported because of it. So that's where, social media could be used for good. Instead of a vehicle for bullying and shaming and, just creating complete havoc on human souls. It can be bad.
Now, I haven't seen any utopian, maybe they exist, but have you seen any like utopian experiments like we used to have in the US, like, I guess the Shakers and that have you seen any emerge on the internet, or like groups that are like utopian and idealistic,
that are trying to create a utopia?
Yeah, like a community.
Not that I know of. I do find that there's people here in Idlewild is another example that they they have a goal to be a good role model on what community is. And so I think sometimes we can do that better, and sometimes others. That's my Shlomo. That if you can hear the dog barking, that's my therapy assistant in the background.
So I have an observation for you. Like a kid, I heard that. I always thought it was like going to be a dark, fluffy dog, and this looks like a white German Shepherd to me. So I think you have a shape-shifting dog.
And I have two. I have two dogs. Lacey is a really sweet dog. Shlomo is the therapy dog. Lacey she's the huntress.
Oh, that's funny.
So yes, I do know. I'm completely colorblind.
Oh, that's funny. We have a white German Shepherd too. We have a white German Shepherd. She's a mix, but she looks like a white German Shepherd. She's fun.
Yeah,
totally.
That's the one we have too. Yeah. So I mean, the whole concept of community building and how to create that. I mean, you're just never going to find utopia. So like, there's some things that are wonderful about being in a small town or feeling in a close-knit community. My daughter, for example, is dating an Israeli who was raised on a kibbutz, which is a whole other type of very close community. But there's also other things to contend with that can become difficult. There can be a lot of gossip, there can be all kinds of things. So, there is no utopia. We're all just, we're trying to get through it the best we can on this beautiful experiment called planet Earth. That's how I see it.
You would love. I have an uncle who lives in Argentina. Well, he's passed away already, but he was the biggest fatalist on Earth. One time I saw him, and he goes, and I was about 20, probably 24, 25 at the time, and he goes, and I wasn't married, and he goes, remember this. The only good woman is another man's woman until she's yours.
What?
And I looked at him like, and I came out of nowhere, and I'm looking at him going, he had never been married. The guy was an engineer. He had patents to his name, very well off, totally eccentric. But he just said, he goes, I love women, but not 24 hours. And I was like, okay. I mean, it was just, so this is, to me, was the ultimate, like, fatalist. I was going, wow, that's an interesting approach to life. And his brother was married for 60 years, no problem. But it's just like, where did you get that philosophy? It's just, I had to throw that in because it was just one of those weirdest philosophies I've ever run into. And I thought it was funny when he said it. And he was very serious. He looked at me like, I'm not kidding. So, okay, whatever makes you happy.
Forbidden fruit, right?
That's right. So
yeah, some things are better left at the fantasy level.
That's right.
If you want to enjoy fantasy, keep it at the fantasy level. If you want to have reality, then have a real relationship.
That's right. That's right. Well, Julie, it has been a pleasure having you on today. Hopefully we can get you on again another time and continue this. This is a good topic, and we've covered a whole mess of little different things, but it's things that are affecting all of us right now in one way or another. So it's things are good to talk about. So definitely, we do hope to see you again soon. And next time I'm out near Idlewild, which we sometimes are, I'll give you a call. Maybe we can get together.
Yeah, come out. Let me, show you around my little town out here. I'd love to have you.
Sounds fun.
It's great.
Sounds fun.
That's beautiful.
And same for you, Susan. I don't know where you're from, but come on out.
I can hear you. The Life Edge question. Oh, Life Edge question, Susan.
Oh, yes. Okay, now we have the Life Edge question. So, by the way, I'm in Oklahoma. Yeah. So here's a question. What is it in your life that has given you an edge?
I would say my sense of adventure, and I am one of these creatures that love change. So I think my desire for change and adventure gives me an edge because I'm not scared of change. I actually really like it. So yeah, I think that's given me an edge. My husband will tell you it was my smile. He would say that my smile gives me an edge. So I like that one too. So we'll throw that one in.
That's nice. They're both great.
Yeah.
It's great. That is a good one. Anyway, we will see all of you next week. If you have any questions, if you want to get a hold of Julie, we'll put her information down below, her website, or I'm not sure if we have a website. I think we do. But you can get a hold of her if you're interested in learning more, or you can buy her book, Pathway to Love. It's a good book. And Susan, we'll see you next week. And if we don't see you guys next week, have a great holidays, and we'll see you next year. Have a wonderful New Year's.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks.
Bye.
That was a quick ending.
I wanted to see more of the